Isolation day 23. Hope everyone's well and looking after yourselves. Friday the 10th of April, and that's Good Friday, and the weather has been glorious. It's been a beautiful day. The only problem that I faced was I spent pretty much the entire day, apart from about 20 minutes, in the office working. I had plenty to do. Yeah, I'm a bit frustrated about it, to be honest. I shouldn't have spent quite so much time. I was planning to spend the entire weekend working, bank holiday weekend working, but now I've changed my plans for numerous reasons. Now I'm going to spend some time with my family. What I've also decided, based upon the fact that I've had a pretty horrendous day, is that I'm going to change the tack here. I'm not going to look at my blood sugars today. I'm not going to look at what I ate. I'm not going to look if I trained. Needless to say, my blood sugars actually were pretty good. I did train. I had a run yesterday, and what I also did was I ate throughout the day and it was fine. I did spend, like I say, 20-25 minutes in the sun, which is a bit of a disappointment, but it is what it is. What I wanted to talk about, and I was going to talk about this in a few days' time, but I listened to a podcast in the last 48 hours, and this podcast is called Talking Type 1. It's the Talking Type 1 podcast, and the narrator is Daniel Newman. And Daniel Newman has done 3 episodes so far. The first episode, he introduced himself and he told us about his diagnosis. He's been type 1 for 23 years. In episode 2, he spoke to a gentleman called Paul Pritchard. And Paul is quite prolific on the forums, and he helps lots of people. And he has an Instagram account. And he's been type 1 for 47 years, 13 years longer than I have. I'm sure he's seen some amazing things. It's a really interesting podcast. So I will put a link below to both the podcast. I will also put in Daniel Newman's Instagram handle, and I'll put in Paul Pritchard's Instagram handle, just so you can contact them if you feel the need. I highly recommend listening to the podcast. It's very good. One of the things they discussed was the 5 stages of grief, and this was part of my sort of content planning for these vlogs. And the reason for that is I find myself some days I'm really upbeat. I always try and be upbeat. I try and look after myself. I try and do the running, go to the gym. I try and eat well. I try and keep myself healthy. I read a lot. I try and keep my mind healthy and my body healthy, but I still go through those stages. I understood them, and I had researched them, and I understood them to be the 5 stages of grief. So let's go through what they are. The first stage is denial and isolation. So this is the "this isn't happening" stage. Me, as an 8-year-old with diabetes, I didn't really go through that stage, I don't think. At the time, I was just happy to be up and out of bed and feeling better and eating. So the fact I had insulin to learn and injections to learn how to give myself, and I had to take my blood sugar, and I had to count my carbs, and I had to weigh on a stick and count what the readings were on that. To be honest, at the time, I just took it in and was like, yeah, okay, this will be okay. I didn't really spend any time being told what the long-term effects of having diabetes was. What I would say is, I imagine that denial and the kind of feeling of isolation is, actually, let's split those. So denial, I imagine, is more prevalent with people that are a little bit older than 8 years old, and certainly adults that are diagnosed with diabetes, because your first reaction would be, well, I know very little about it. And the second reaction would be, bloody hell, I haven't done this before. I haven't had to do anything like this. So why is it me? And probably this isn't happening to me. What I would say is the isolation part, yes. You know what? I feel that. Everyone feels that at times. You feel very alone. Having diabetes and being the only one in your family, the only one in your school year, the only one in your primary school year, the only one out of all your university friends, the only one out of all of your home friends. I was all of those things. And actually, do you feel isolated because of it? Yeah, at times you do. You know what? Do I spend all my time talking about diabetes with my friends? No. Do they know about it and do they talk to me about it? Yeah, absolutely, they do, but not all the time. So that's the first stage. And the interesting part about the 5 stages of grief is that you work your way through the stages. Now, what you don't do is, it doesn't have to be in order. So let's go through them. Denial and isolation. The second one is anger. The third one is depression. The fourth one is bargaining. And the fifth one, or maybe the third one, is bargaining. The fourth one is depression. The fifth one is acceptance. That doesn't have to be the order for everyone. So you can go in any order and deal with that. And like I said before, grief, can be to do with the loss of a loved one, or it can be to do with chronic illness. In my case, and in your case, probably it's a chronic illness. We've been through denial and isolation. The next one is anger. Now this is a good one, because this is the one that I think I feel the most, which is kind of like the pain of being diabetic. And what happens is your anger can be aimed at inanimate objects, it can be aimed at complete strangers, it can be aimed at the television, it can be aimed at a book that you read, it can be aimed at friends, and it definitely can be aimed at family. Because what you do is you take out your anger on the people. When you take your blood and it makes no sense, you kind of, what I try to do, certainly when I'm at work, is kind of grit my teeth and go, right, okay, how do I deal with this? And it's the kind of growth, that's the growth mindset. That's the right, how do we deal with this? When you're at home, sometimes you can just go, sod this, almost throw your toys out the pram as such, and then you'll be snappy with the kids, you'll be snappy with your wife or your husband. That's not a particularly, well, it's definitely not a healthy way to be, and it's one of those things that I have a massive problem with, because I hate doing that, which is why I work so hard at trying to control it. Not angry in an aggressive way, I just get frustrated. It's more the frustration really than anything. The next one is bargaining. Now bargaining is kind of like the helplessness and the vulnerability. And what you do is you almost bargain with yourself in your mind, and you go, oh, if only I did this, or if only I did that. So I do it on a weekly basis. If only I hadn't eaten this. If only I hadn't taken as much insulin. If only I hadn't gone for that run and worked quite so hard. If only I hadn't gone training and I'd taken more. You know, you're always going through these if onlys. But I think when you're first diagnosed, I imagine the if only for type 2s, because you would be saying, if only I hadn't eaten this. If only I hadn't run my life in this way. If only I hadn't drunk this. You know, those kind of things. Because food is a big part, food and health and lifestyle is a big part of contracting type 2 diabetes. But what I find, again, is with the bargaining side, you get pulled back, and I get pulled back certainly in questioning what I'm doing on a weekly basis. I read something quite recently that said humans have X number of thoughts on a daily basis. People with or decisions to make on a daily basis. People with diabetes have to make another 180 more than anyone else. So we have to make 180 more decisions on a daily basis than other people. You know what? That takes its toll. And that can pull you back into here, to any of those stages. The next stage is depression, the sadness and the regret, which, I guess when my bloods were really, really bad, 4 and a bit years ago, I was very sad, very, very, very down, feeling very beaten up. Part of me thinks that's because I'm putting other people through it, and part of it is just because I was always of the opinion that I could control this, and I could be on top of it, but I was so out of control at that time that actually I know I was depressed at that time, and that has other psychological connotations. One of the things I've always prided myself on is having a positive outlook. Or my dad always says to me, you seem to always look for a solution to everything. It's almost like you look at things as being an equation, a sum. And to a certain extent, I don't know whether it's the diabetes that causes me to do that, or it's just who I am that causes me to do that. But if there's no solution, and if I'm not aiming for a right answer and for something that's correct, then what's the point? Do I give up? No, I don't give up. No, you just keep on plugging away. And I think everyone keeps on plugging away, whether you've got type 1, type 2, gestational diabetes, or any other type of diabetes. So the last stage is acceptance. And this is the stage where you certainly with a chronic illness, you become a bit more calm and a bit more controlled. You can make peace with the fact that you have this chronic illness, and actually you are managing to deal with it. Does that happen? Yes. Do you accept it at times? Yeah, I think so. I would imagine that I'm probably at acceptance, let's say 60% of the time. I question myself a lot. And I question my blood sugars a lot, mainly because, again, I think because I work with figures, I'm always questioning. I'm very tough on myself, and I'm told constantly by nurses and doctors that I'm too tough on myself. But then again, If there's a job worth doing, let's do it properly. But I think the point and the reason for talking about this today was because I listened to the podcast and I've been talking to a couple of other people with diabetes, and we all experience different stages of this at different times, but all stages of this at different times as well. And it doesn't matter how long you've been diabetic for or how short you have, we can all understand that you get pulled back and you're constantly flitting between 1 to 5, and actually you just do the best you can. But you've got to have, and one of the major things that we've been speaking about is you've got to have that growth mindset. You've got to have the mindset of, listen, you know what, bring it on, let's have a go. You know what, today might be a bad day, but tomorrow's going to be better. And to a certain extent, as I was saying about Gary Shiner, who was the author of Think Like a Pancreas, if you're winning 80 to 90% of the days and 90% of the time, actually you're doing bloody well. And I think you need to cut yourself a bit of slack. And I've learned over time to be a little bit more, to cut myself a bit more slack. There's lots of information out there that talks about actually 7 stages of grief, and they add 2 more stages. So they add an initial stage, which is shock. With a chronic illness, potentially you have shock, but I think that shock would manifest itself in so much as, I don't understand, I don't know what I need to do. That would be the shock, and it would be scared probably more than shock. And the last one is testing, and that's just before acceptance. And testing is to do with seeking solutions to the problems that you're facing in all of the other stages. And testing for me is the blood sugars, is the CGM, is the pump, and everything else that you're doing. So I quite like to look at it as almost like a 7 stage rather than a 5 stage. So as we've said, the 5 or 7 stages of grief do not occur in an order. You get pulled into different parts at different times, and actually you just have to deal with them as they appear. What I would say at this time is everything's fine. You know what, this is perfectly normal, and you're gonna have down days, you're gonna have up days, you're gonna feel like a god some days, and you're gonna feel like shite other days, because that's just the way this chronic illness will make you feel. Hopefully you've got supportive people around you, and you've got a bit of a community that you can touch base with. You know, I'm making a few more contacts in the diabetes community than I ever have before. I've always been quite private about it and tried to deal with it myself, but I did realise 4 to 5 years ago that the fact that I restricted myself from having a pump because I didn't particularly like the idea of something being attached to me was almost juvenile, really. You know, you've got to work with the times. The technology is so advanced now that to deny it and to ignore it would be, in my view, a schoolboy error. I think we'll leave it there today. I know that I'm trying for this not to be a kind of a lecture. It's not a lecture. It was more information for you, hopefully. Please look after yourselves. If you are at any of those stages of grief, reach out to someone and just talk to someone that you love, or send a message to someone and get some. Often what we need is some supportive words and maybe a cuddle. Okay, so look after yourselves, take care, stay safe, and I'll catch up with you tomorrow.